Hello and welcome to my channel. If you do not know who I am, I go by Strange Online, and today we're going to be doing a reference versus no reference challenge. This isn't really a tutorial video, more so just explaining the importance of using references, and what better way of using a reference than drawing something I'm not familiar with. So today I'm drawing knights, specifically knight gear or suits. Personally, I'm a big fan of medieval fantasy. I love like all the dark aesthetic like fantasy stuff, especially when it was trending on TikTok and there was that like one sound, the da 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 da. If you know, you know. But if you've watched my other videos as well, you know that I'm currently working on a story that is set in like fantasy times. So I wanted to put in some practice on actually drawing something that you might see in the story that I'm creating. So firstly, I'm going in and drawing just what I know from memory. This isn't my first time drawing knights. I've drawn knights maybe like a few times beforehand, but definitely not enough to know like in my memory how they should look. I guess I have an idea of how they should look. Again, I'm not using a reference for this first page, so it's very loose in detail. I kind of remember general shapes, but that's about it. Typically something I see from new artists is like this sort of backlash against using reference. It's not as bad as it used to be. I remember in early 2010s, at least in the artist space I was in, there was a pretty big push for using references sometimes because it was kind of tied to the idea of copying art. And I do believe there is a conversation that is to be said about, using references from other people's art. But for the references that I'll be using in this video, I am using like photos and like gear, actual gear online that I see, like mainly on Pinterest. However, I'm a firm believer that reference can be used in credit and in moderation to anything, including other people's art. Of course, credit is always due where it's due. It's important to not rely too much on somebody else's art to make yours better, I guess. But reference is important, especially when you want to learn how to draw. As you can see here, I kind of have the idea of what I'm drawing. I have like different parts of the gear. I know that there's like something separating the chest area and the arms and the shoulders because I've seen knights before, but I was really struggling with knowing where the cutoff for each gear was. In turn, it kind of looks like an animatronic for some reason. I'm sorry guys, I was never a big Five Nights at Freddy's person, but I guess that just came back to me from somewhere back when I was 14. But yeah, as I was saying, there was a lot of backlash in using references in the past. I'm not sure if it's the same way now. I haven't been in like the beginner place in a long time. I've been doing art for a very long while, so don't know what new artists consider cheating nowadays. But for me personally, I know that I was pretty against using references in tutorials at a young age because it was frowned upon, and because of that, I was a little stunted in learning. Eventually, I did get to using tutorials, and I realized that my worth isn't in like being self-taught totally, but having some sort of reference definitely helped me be a better artist. A lot of stuff that I learned is typically from YouTube. I used a lot of YouTube tutorials, not necessarily how to draw something specific, but how to learn color theory, how to use perspective, stuff like that, where it's a little more difficult to learn on your own because you would have to find some frame of reference, and typically that would be in real life classes or going to, get a degree. But it was so much easier to just go and look up how to do this on YouTube. I think YouTube is a great resource for learning how to do art. Honestly, like biggest recommendation to younger artists, go on YouTube and just look up what you want to learn, because there's most likely a video for almost anything you want to learn on YouTube, which is such a great, cool thing to have. We're lucky enough to be in a generation where we have access to literally learn anything we want on the internet, good and bad. So obviously use your powers for good. Don't do anything weird online, but I would say learning something online is one of the greatest things that we in this generation can do and have access to. Going back to the art that I'm making currently, I don't know why, but this helmet was giving me such a struggle. I couldn't remember exactly how the helmets looked on actual knights. They have like this really weird cover on the head, but I wasn't exactly sure how it covered the head. I wasn't sure if it was like a mesh that went around the head. This is primarily why it's so important to use references. References are mainly used for all the technicalities in art, meaning if you don't know an anatomy and you need a reference, boom, a reference is there to basically point out how the anatomy works. If you don't know how certain weapons look, what are the functions of those weapons? What are the functions of this armor? Why is certain plating here and not there? This is all information that you can get from a reference, and which is why it's so important to use references in the first place, right? Without a reference, I was really lost on where I should be putting all these materials, where it would actually be impactful to have armor. Of course, I knew basic stuff like, hey, there should probably be a chest plate to protect all the vital organs, but when it came to the stomach area or like the joints in between, I wasn't sure what exactly went in between. It was a lot of the smaller details, but those small details build up and make all my art look a little amateur in this first page. Even though it's not too notable, I don't think, it's still something that will build up over time, and all these small details will just make something less sure of itself. Using references would create a much more stable composition to all the art that I make, as well as actually make sense within my artwork. And without it, I was pretty lost on a lot of things. Another thing that I also wanted to practice was doing half armor. So like having armor that isn't fully covering. I chose to make like a little shoulder armor here, and then also some armor for like the rib cage organ area. Basically just armor that still has some of the clothes showing of like a regular person, or maybe a person who's just training. The only unfortunate thing about this part is that I couldn't find a reference for the life of me, or maybe I just didn't try hard enough to look, of armor on like outer clothing in this type of style. I'm sure that if I looked better, I could have found it, but I was just struggling and I just didn't really put in that effort. So I will be drawing something else rather than this on the second page. And with that, we've finished this non-reference area. Now moving on to the next piece, I will say that references take up a lot more time when it comes to actually drawing them and referencing them. Obviously, if you're looking back and forth between your reference and then drawing down and then referencing and then drawing down, it does take more time. Here's my piece of advice for that. Your reference can be a very powerful piece in your art, but it doesn't need to be the main focal point. You don't constantly need to reference, especially if you're doing something creative, which art is creative, but I mean like creating your own character or your own story. This knight doesn't have to have the exact plating I have in my reference. It doesn't need to have the exact like armor pieces. In fact, there is a variety of like, I've discovered this while I was looking at the references. There's a variety of different armor for like specifically the shoulder like arm part. There are so much variety that I don't need to specifically choose out the one from my reference. Instead, I can kind of use all my references, and I would really suggest using multiple references when you are referencing. As you could see already, one of the details I missed out on are these straps apparently that are on suits to kind of keep them all together. This suit really reminds me of the suit that Shrek wears in the first movie, where he's just like trying to save Princess Fiona and he has it like covered. It was very like styled in that era. Another thing that I also noticed when I was using references was of course the helmet. It was kind of like a more loose thing than I thought it was. It was all made out of metal, but instead it had like the bottom was more flowy, I guess. Another thing is of course the shoulder parts. I'm not sure what the terminology for all this armor is, but the shoulder parts, it had like this little like lip circle thing that I drew in, and that is for the capes actually, as well as the bottom part half. It's not like this animatronic style like pantsuit thing. It actually usually has this like skirt, I guess. It's not a skirt. There's a skirt within it, and then there's like metal surrounding the two sides. I don't know. I wouldn't have figured that out without the reference though. And as I was saying before, I'm not strictly going with the references. Actually, a good amount of this was kind of invented along the way, but the references really helped to build the idea of what I should be kind of concerned about technically. Like I understood where the shoulder pads began, I understood where the helmet cut off, or where I should be placing certain belts, and that's just something I wouldn't have known off the top of my head. Now I will say, over time, once you've drawn something a good amount of times, you're gonna learn and you're not gonna need references as much as you used to. Let's say I'm a new artist, right? And I want to draw hair in a certain way. Once I've drawn hair in that certain way, a certain certain amount of times, I'll know in the back of my head how I would draw it and how it looks from my art style. Therefore, I won't need that reference as much as I used to, which is the great thing about using references. Eventually, you will learn from those references and you won't need them as much anymore. I will say it's good to always go back, always good to like look back and see if it's still matching up to what you initially drew and what you were initially going for, and it will cut down on time tremendously. I really like the way that these turned out compared to the first ones I made. I feel like there's so much more personality added to them. There's a lot more armor that makes sense. There's a lot of armor that just looks cooler in my opinion, and everything looks way more organized, and everything also just looks like it belongs. I think the art I make when I use references have been one of the best pieces I've ever made because everything looks technically sound. Besides all that reference stuff, I wanted to talk about my favorite types of knights. So I really like the knights that are really brooding and like have cool capes attached to them. Like, I don't know how to describe that type of knight. I don't know if there's like a knight subgenre or if it's like a category, but whenever I see a knight design like that, I'm just like, oh my god, that's cool. And extra points if it has some sort of cross as like an emblem. I just think that's really cool. So I was definitely more attached to the design I made for the second knight that I drew on this page. I just thought that he looked way cooler. I will say the other knight is cool as well. Like I have a preference, but they're both pretty epic. Something I also worked on in this page, as I said before, I didn't get the chance to make the like half armor look that I did for the next page, but I did work on making like this armored hand kind of look, or gloved hand. I'm pretty sure I referenced from an armored hand, so I'll just call it that, but there are like some knights that just wear gloves from the looks of it, or gloves that have like armor on the top half of the hand. Either way, I was drawing this using my reference, doing that, and then I realized this low-key reminded me of when I did the Bakugo for my 100 subs special. I don't know, I just kind of thought that was funny. Either way, I wasn't too happy with the way this gloved hand look kind of ended up looking, I guess, but I mean, it's okay. Like I said, I did use a reference, but using a reference doesn't always mean it's gonna be 100%, you know, like perfect art all the time, so I did the best I could. I will say this though, it looks way better now than it would have looked if I hadn't used a reference, so I really am just hammering in that point. Overall, I think this page ended up looking good, and it looks way better than what the other page looked like. Anyways, if you've stuck around this long in the video, I want to thank you so much for watching. I had so much fun recreating these like knight looks. I don't know, I think they're really fun to draw, so yeah. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!